Today is January 28th, 2026, another flexible instruction day. And folks, if you're paying attention to the weather outlook, we may be off all week, which will be and make a very memorable senior year for you folks. Today we're going to finish part 2 of our GDP session. So hopefully this will be a little quicker than yesterday's video. Take notes. We do have a homework assignment that is due tonight. You do have a bell ringer. There is no bonus in this video, so there's no need for you to go search for it. I am not putting one in today's video. For those of you that don't understand that, the only way you could get your bell ringer fully answered is if you paid attention in the video where I told you that you needed to write Japan 67, 67, 67. That's right, 67. If you did that, you were able to get the bonus that I offered. Unfortunately, a lot of people did, so that cut the number of bonus points down considerably. For those of you who are listening to this, kicking yourselves, maybe you should watch the videos a little closely. We begin part 2 on slide 17, discussing gross versus net investment. Gross investment includes everything firms spend on capital. Net investment subtracts depreciation. If net investment is positive, the economy is growing. If it's zero, we're just replacing old machines. Negative net investment means we're shrinking. This is a subtle but very testable idea. When economists talk about investment, we have to be very careful with our language because gross and net investment mean very different things. Gross investment is total spending on new capital in the economy during a year. That includes new factories, machines, equipment, and new residential housing. But here's the key point. Gross investment includes replacement investment. Some of that spending is just replacing machines or buildings that wore out. That's where depreciation comes in. Depreciation measures how much capital wears out or becomes obsolete each year. Every economy has depreciation. Machines break. Technology gets outdated. Buildings age. Net investment tells us whether the economy is productive capacity is actually growing. Net investment equals gross investment minus depreciation. If net investment is positive, the capital stock is growing and the economy can produce more in the future. If net investment is zero, we're just replacing worn out capital. If net investment is negative, the economy is shrinking its productive capacity. A simple analogy is a treadmill. Gross investment is how fast I'm walking. Depreciation is how fast the belt is pulling me backward. Net investment tells me whether I'm actually moving forward, standing still, or falling behind. This matters because only net investment increases future production. Gross investment alone doesn't tell us whether the economy is really growing. Income equals output is one of the most important ideas in macroeconomics. When someone buys something, that money becomes income for someone else. There is no mystery money disappearing. That's why GDP measured by spending equals GDP measured by income. Same economy, different lens. When we say income equals output, what we mean is that every dollar spent on goods and services becomes income for someone else. If a business sells a product, that revenue doesn't disappear. It turns into wages for workers, rent for landowners, interest for lenders, or profits for owners. Think about buying a coffee. When I spend $5, that $5 becomes income for the coffee shop. The shop then uses that money to pay employees, suppliers, and rent. That same dollar keeps moving throughout our economy. This is why economists say output and income are two sides of the same coin. One side is production, goods and services being made. The other side is income, money earned by producing those goods and services. They must be equal because one cannot exist without the other. This idea also explains why we can measure GDP in different ways. We can add up spending or we can add up income, and we should get the same total. If we don't, something is being miscounted. When we talk about the income flow sequence, think of income shrinking as it moves down the line. GDP is a big number. Depreciation gets subtracted to get NDP. Then we adjust for foreign income to get national income. After taxes and transfers, we arrive at personal income. And after personal taxes, we're left with disposable income, the money households actually control. This slide shows what happens to income as it flows through the economy. We're starting with total production and ending with what households can actually spend. We begin with GDP, which is the total value of final goods and services produced. But not all of that production turns into income people can use. Some of it just replaces worn out capital. So the first subtraction is depreciation. When we subtract depreciation from GDP, we get net domestic product, or NDP. NDP tells us how much output is left after maintaining our capital stock. Next, we move on to national income, or NI. This represents income earned by labor and capital, wages, rent, interest, and profits. At this step, we adjust for things like indirect business taxes and add net foreign factors. Then we get to personal income, or PI. This is income households actually receive. Some income earned in production never reaches households, like retained corporate profits, while some income households receive, like Social Security, wasn't earned through current production. That's why we have to adjust again. Finally, we subtract personal taxes to get disposable income, or DI. This is the income households control. It's the end of the accounting line. Once households have disposable income, they face only two choices. They spend it or they save it. That's it. This is why the textbook says disposable income equals consumption plus savings. The big idea here is that income doesn't vanish as it flows through the economy. It just gets reclassified, redistributed, and reduced at each step. This sequence explains how production turns into purchasing power. Now we're going to talk about disposable income, which is one of those terms that sounds boring but actually explains a lot about how the economy really works. Disposable income is the income households actually have available to spend or save. In other words, this is the take-home pay. Not what you earn on paper, but what you're left with after taxes and after receiving any government transfers. Here's the formula that you need to keep. Disposable income equals personal income minus personal taxes. So let me slow that down. Personal income includes wages, rent, interest, profits, and transfer payments like Social Security or unemployment benefits. Once the government takes its share in the form of personal taxes, what's left is disposable income. I like to think of it this way with my own paycheck. I might earn a certain amount on paper, but once federal, state, and local taxes come out, that's the money I actually control to use. The money that hits my bank account, that's my disposable income. Now, here's why it matters economically. Disposable income can only go to two places, as I mentioned before. Consumption, that's what we spend our money on, or savings, money that I set aside for future use. Every dollar of disposable income becomes either consumption or saving. There's no third option here. This is huge because consumer spending is the largest component of GDP. So when disposable income rises, consumption usually rises and GDP tends to grow. When disposable income falls, spending slows and the economy can weaken. Now, we've talked about this in class, why we tell you that spending your money is good because that keeps the economy rolling. Every time you buy something, that's money someone else gets to then spend. That's why economists and policymakers care so much about taxes and transfer payments. When the government cuts taxes or increases transfer payments, disposable income goes up, and that can stimulate our economy. When taxes rise, disposable income shrinks and spending slows down. So when you hear economists talk about helping households, what they really mean is increasing disposable income, because that's the money that actually drives real economic activity. The bottom line, disposable income is the money that actually matters because it's the money people can spend or save, and that's what fuels our economy. A lot of this sounds redundant, but this is the main crux of what you need to know for this class. So let's talk about consumption and savings again. Once households get disposable income, there are only two things left they can do: spend it or save it. Saving doesn't mean investing in stocks. It just means not consuming. Every dollar of DI must show up as consumption or savings. There's no third option. Now that we know what disposable income is, this next slide is actually very logical because every dollar of disposable income can only go to one of two places. Disposable income is split between consumption and savings. There's no mystery here. You either spend money or you save it. Consumption is household spending on goods and services. This is things like food, rent, entertainment, and services. In macroeconomics, consumption is a big deal because it's the largest component of GDP. I think I've made that clear now. This is the second time I've said it. If consumption is strong, the economy usually looks strong. If consumption falls, that's often a warning sign of trouble. Savings, on the other hand, is the portion of disposable income that is not spent. This can mean putting money into a savings account, buying bonds, investing in stocks, or paying down debt. Even though savings might feel like not participating in the economy, it actually plays a crucial role because savings provides the funds that businesses borrow to invest. Here's the relationship that you need to remember. Disposable income equals consumption plus savings. Every single time, no exceptions. Using a real world example, if I get paid and after taxes I have $1,000 of disposable income and I spend $800, that means I saved $200. If I spend $950, I saved $50. The numbers change, but the relationship never does. And here's another critical thing you need to remember. Every dollar you save in the bank becomes someone else's money that they borrowed from that bank. Just because I put $5,000 in the bank doesn't mean that that bank has my $5,000 at that given time. They've taken that money and they've given it to someone else in the form of a loan. That's important because they're spending that money and keeping our economy going. This helps explain economic behavior during good times and bad. During economic expansion, people feel confident, so consumption rises and savings often falls. During recessions, people get nervous, so savings rises and consumption falls, which actually makes the downturn worse. So let's make sure you understand circular flow. Think of the economy like a giant continuous loop or a circle where money is always moving and everyone has a role. It starts with GDP, the total value of all final goods and services produced. That GDP generates income for households, businesses, and government. Households receive personal income, pay taxes, and then they have that disposable income. They use that money to either consume goods and services or save. Remember, every dollar is accounted for. There's no mystery money that's hidden in the mattress. When we talk about households who spend, the money flows back to businesses as revenue, which allows firms to pay wages, reinvest in equipment, and generate profits. Part of those profits may go to the government through taxes, which then returns to the economy as government spending on public goods and services, like roads, schools, and salaries for public employees. Even savings isn't stagnant. Banks can lend household savings to businesses for investment. That investment creates new production, more income, and the loop continues. Don't forget about net exports, the part of spending that comes from other countries or goes to other countries. That brings money in from abroad or sends money out, slightly expanding or contracting that flow. The key takeaway here, every dollar spent becomes someone else's income, and that income flows back into the economy again. Now that we understand how GDP is measured and how money flows in the economy, let's step back and ask the big question. Does more GDP actually make us happier? GDP is a measure of economic activity, but it doesn't capture everything that matters in life. It tells us the total market value of goods and services produced, but it doesn't measure beauty, relationships, health, or personal satisfaction. Imagine two countries, one with tons of cars, factories, and gadgets, and another with fewer material goods, but cleaner air, safer streets, and a stronger community connection. GDP might say the first country is richer, but the people in the second might actually feel happier. We also have to consider what contributes to GDP. More prisons, more divorce lawyers, more pollution cleanup all increase GDP, but do they improve our well-being? No, not always. GDP counts transactions, not outcomes. Economists and researchers have created alternative measures like the Index of Social Health and the World Happiness Index, which try to capture real-life satisfaction. The Index of Social Health looks at things like infant mortality, crime, poverty, and teen suicide. The World Happiness Index even asks people directly, how happy are you? The key takeaway here is this: GDP matters for material well being, but is not a complete picture of life quality. Higher GDP usually helps, but real happiness comes from a mix of material and non material factors: social supports, health, personal freedom, and the environment. Think of GDP like the scoreboard on a video game. It tells you how many points you've earned, but it doesn't tell you if the game was fun, if your team worked well together, or if you actually enjoyed playing. Points matter, but they're not everything here. Let's take a look at the Index of Social Health, which looks at things like crime, inequality, and health. According to this measure, America's social health barely improved even as GDP exploded. That doesn't mean GDP is useless, it means it's incomplete. The Index of Social Health was developed by researchers at Vassar College to provide a broader measure of well-being than GDP. While GDP focuses on material production and income, this index looks at social outcomes that affect quality of life. Here are 4 factors and indicators that they use. One is infant mortality. A higher rate shows problems in healthcare and family well-being. Drug abuse reflects challenges in public health and social stability. The third is health insurance coverage. It shows access to essential medical care. And the last is poverty among the aged, which indicates whether older adults can live comfortably. These 4 indicators highlight issues that money alone cannot fix. For instance, a country could have a high GDP but still have high rates of teen suicide and crime, which signals poor social health. GDP is like counting the number of cars a factory makes, while the Index of Social Health is like checking whether those cars are safe, whether people have driver's education, and whether the roads they drive on are well maintained. Both matter, but one is quantity and the other is quality of life. One striking example from our textbook. Between 1900 and 2011, U.S. GDP per capita grew 34%, but social health only improved 6%. That's a huge gap. It shows that economic growth doesn't automatically translate into better lives for everyone. Now let's shift from social health to happiness, a little more personal and subjective but still measurable. The World Happiness Index, created by the United Nations, tries to measure how happy people feel in their own lives rather than just looking at money or material output like GDP. It relies on self-reported surveys where people answer questions about their satisfaction with life, social support, freedoms, and other factors. What's really interesting is that high GDP doesn't always mean high happiness. For example, in Finland, they consistently rank as the happiest country, even though its GDP isn't the absolute highest in the world. Whereas the United States, despite having the highest GDP per capita, comes in 19th. Countries like South Sudan rank the lowest, with extremely low GDP and severe social challenges. So what drives happiness according to this index? It's a mix of these 4 things. Social support networks, having friends, family, or communities you can rely on. Life expectancy and health, being able to live a long, healthy life. Personal freedom and governance, feeling free to make choices and trusting institutions. And the last one, perceptions of corruption. The trust in society matters for happiness. Think of this analogy. Excuse me. GDP is like counting how many slices of pizza a restaurant makes. But the World Happiness Index is asking people if they actually enjoyed the pizza, if they had good company, and if the restaurant environment made them feel comfortable. It's just not the quantity, it's the quality and experience. So let's wrap this chapter up. Here's the bottom line. GDP is necessary, but not sufficient. Policymakers need it, economists rely on it, but we should never confuse economic growth with human flourishing. The quality of life tomorrow depends not just on how much we produce, but what we choose to produce. The main point I want you to take away is this. National income accounting is a powerful tool, but it's only part of the story. GDP and related measures tell us a lot about how much we produce and earn, and they are essential for understanding the economy, designing policy, and comparing nations. But the catch, numbers alone don't tell us how well people are actually living. Things like happiness, social health, and quality of life can't be fully captured by GDP. That's why we use the Index of Social Health and the World Happiness Index. GDP is the engine of the economy, showing us how much fuel is in the tank, but social health and happiness are the road, the scenery, and whether we're enjoying the ride. So, as future policymakers, economists, or informed citizens, you need to look at both material and non material indicators. Ask yourself this: are people truly better off or just producing more? Is growth sustainable and improving lives in a meaningful way? You have a homework assignment that's due for tomorrow. If we're in class, we will go over it. We will then have our assessment on Friday. If you're in class on Friday, expect a paper and pencil test. If we're online, you get the luxury of taking it at home. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day. Go Patriots.